Let's talk about cold calling. I know, I know it's the dreaded C word of sales, but what if I told you it doesn't have to be a soul crushing experience of forcing yeses or sounding like every other annoying salesperson that's out there? So let's forget like those pushy scripted sales calls or scripted openings that make you feel like, you're just trying to sell them something, that make you feel slimy, make you feel sleazy. Forget those yes questions that make your prospects feel trapped and defensive, and forget sounding like a robot that's reading a script. Instead, I want to show you today how you can turn cold calls into warm conversations that build a connection, establish some credibility, that actually can generate leads. And this is about creating real connections, not just closing deals. And it starts with embracing the power of no and sounding like a human, not just another salesperson. And so, if you've watched my channel at all, you've probably heard me talk a lot about this concept of the power of no in sales. And, there's some great books you can read that talk about this, great studies that show the importance of in sales of prospects feeling like they have a sense of control. And there's just psychology that shows that people are more likely to engage and to open up in a conversation when they feel like they have the freedom to say no. So asking questions that allow for a no response early on can actually disarm your prospects and make them feel a lot more comfortable. And it shifts the focus from closing the deal to actually building a real relationship and understanding the prospect's needs. And so the other part of this, though, is sounding different. Too often, I find that salespeople sound like every other salesperson, and that's why there's all this resistance when you're in a cold calling or prospecting situation. So whether you're dialing on the phone or knocking door to door or going business to business, when you sound like every other salesperson, that gets the walls up. When people recognize that what he's saying sounds like the last sales guy, they get defensive. There's resistance. And it was really interesting. I did a quick Google search of like scripts for an insurance salesman. I used to do insurance. I used to do a lot of phone sales. And one of the first few scripts I found online is exactly what I wouldn't do. So, hi Mary, my name is Drew Norton. I'm from XYZ Insurance Company Agency. We're expanding our insurance coverage to your area. Do you have a few seconds for me to tell you about our services? Because I think we can save you money on your insurance premiums. The save the money at the end, it isn't bad, but all of everything just said right there is going to push up, is going to create resistance and sounds like what everybody else is saying. I was online, someone was asking for help in a Facebook group I'm in, door to door Facebook group, for help with their sales pitch. And he said, well, I keep getting shut down early. And I said, well, you're probably saying things that make you sound like everybody else. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, are you saying something like, hey, I'm Drew with XYZ Roofing. The reason we're here in the neighborhood is there's been some storm damage. And so we're doing free inspections on people's roofs to find out whether or not you need roofing help. And I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was something very close to that. He's like, oh, I get it. Yeah, the first thing I'm saying, that first 10 to 15 seconds, is the same thing they hear from every other roofing guy coming through the area when there's storm damage. So how do we break that script? How do we do things in a way where we don't sound like everybody else? So I think it's recognizing, okay, what is my industry sound like? What is the common script that everybody's hearing? Because I want to do the opposite of that. I want to be different. And so, some ways that we can really break up that salesy vibe is one, just speaking conversationally with natural pauses and inflections. Like, I'm okay with ums and ahs and pauses, right? I want to avoid the monotone, but I also don't want to be too overly enthusiastic. I don't want to be too much, right? Like, so be you. Whatever that is, be you at the end of the day. So humanize your voice, speak conversationally, use natural pauses and inflections, and let's make it a little bit personal. And so when I was doing insurance sales, one thing I found that worked really well for me is instead of having that scripted response, I would call and say something like, "Hi, is this John? Hey, John, this is Drew. How's it going?" And they're thinking, Drew, he's talking to me like he knows me. Who is this guy? Like, these are the thoughts going through their head, right? And it would get people to stop and think for a second, right? Well, hey, John, like I actually work with XYZ Insurance Agency. The reason I'm calling you today is, yeah, I guess we've given you a quote in the past, and we were going to send you out a new quote. Only problem is it's been a couple of years. Like, are you even driving that 2015 Toyota Tundra anymore? And just that little pause in the beginning and that quick assumption that we were going to have a conversation would get those calls moving forward, right? And so I would say maybe that isn't a complete cold call because they were someone who'd gotten a quote before and they didn't know me from Adam. And I was calling an old lead. It was very close to a cold call, but I found when I took a moment to, sound a little bit different, I would still tell them who I was with, what I was doing, what I was looking to do for them, but just breaking up some of that monotony, some of that scripted sounding sales pitch really got me further with people. So creating some type of pattern interrupt or some type of hook or some type of some call it breaking preoccupation. I want to do something that gets their attention. And so sometimes a no question can actually be that pattern interrupt. So for example, when my time selling door to door, most of the product or services I sold in door to door had to be sold to a homeowner. So very common, everyone's asking, are you the homeowner, right? And so if every other salesperson is knocking on the door saying, are you the homeowner? That question starts bringing sales resistance, okay? In fact, one time, and so most of the time people would tell you if they were. I think sometimes people would lie and say no. I think what I also found was some people would get defensive though. Well, why are you asking? Or who are you? Like, they'd be like, why are you even asking me if I own the house, right? I remember one time just being blown away because the person finally said to me, oh, I thought you were here to serve me papers. Like, that's why I didn't want to tell you that I own the house. It's like, oh, okay. Right? So we don't want to ask a question that leads to yes, that makes them feel trapped. And so that's why I love this idea of no-oriented questions. I would ask, hey, so instead of asking, are you the homeowner? Hey, I'm Drew. I don't know if you know the neighbors down the street. We're working with them. I guess first off, you guys aren't renting the house, are you? And I loved asking that because if they did rent, they'd tell me and they'd disqualify themselves and I move on. If they owned it, usually there's this sense of pride. And one thing that humans love to do is we love to correct things. We love to be right. So when I'd say, hey, are you renting the house here? No, this is my place. Like, almost like I'd see their chest puff out, like the king of the castle kind of step into his like defense of his home, right? And I loved it because one, it gave them the ability to tell me no really early in the conversation. Two, it was a different question that broke preoccupation, that interrupted their pattern, that made me not sound like every other salesperson that they talk to. And so I think if we can use no questions early on and really focus on some things that might be of value to the client, like that can help us overcome some of those struggles we have that first 15, 30 seconds of our prospecting. So I love embracing the power of no. I love asking no-oriented questions. And if you want some more examples of some no-oriented questions, back to that question in that script, our insurance script I read earlier, do you have a few seconds for me to tell you about our services? If they say yes, then they kind of feel like they're locked into hearing your presentation. So you can just flip that by saying, hey, would you be too busy right now for me to spend 30 seconds explaining what we do? Right? They're probably going to say, no, I'm not too busy to that. Or they might say yes and call me back at this time. So a good way to take a yes question and turn it into a no is, hey, would you be against? Would you be opposed? Would it be ridiculous if? And that no question can create a sense of freedom that can really help in a prospecting conversation. Now, in sales, I've often found that we want them at some point to get them to start agreeing with us. We want to tie them down with some yeses. We want to get them on our side, so to speak. And I think midway and towards the end of the sale, it's going to be appropriate to ask some questions that get them to actually say yes to things. And I found it's also can do amazing things to let people say no. And there's studies that show that when prospects can say no early on, it just increases the engagement that they'll have. So encourage you to look at your opening statements if you do any prospecting, and how can I make this not sound like every other person out there in the industry? And encourage you to maybe put down what's worked well for you in the comments below, or what you've tried in the past that actually has done the opposite and has been really bad. So I'm Drew Norton, the Everyday Sales Leader. This is your daily dose of sales inception.